My name is Jeremiah Lindeman. I'm an instructor in ESRI Educational Services Department in Redlands, California. Many of you have taken my previous web workshop entitled Customizing ArcMap, Easy Ways to Extend the Interface. If you have, welcome back. If you haven't taken a web workshop before, welcome. This workshop today will extend much of what we learned in that workshop. Let's now take a look at what we will be learning today. Today we'll be going over two key topics. The first will be the Visual Basic environment. We'll discuss how we can navigate in the Visual Basic environment and just get ourselves comfortable with the different items that we will see within the Visual Basic for Applications editor. Second, we will discuss how code is organized. Now, we will not be writing any code in this seminar today, but we will be doing that in future web workshops. We will break today up into two different sections. Each section will be followed by a brief topic review. Before we start looking at Visual Basic for Applications in the editor, let's look at why we might want to use Visual Basic for Applications. For those of you who have taken my previous web workshop, Customizing ArcMap, Easy Ways to Extend the Interface, we found that there are many developer samples out there that can be run. There's two main reasons why we're going to use developer samples or use Visual Basic for Applications. One is to extend the functionality of ArcGIS. Now, there are many tools that come along with ArcGIS, but sometimes people may want to customize the environment even further. For example, what we see below is a custom form that will calculate the square area based upon certain polygons that you select in different units. We can make a custom form and build it in Visual Basic for Applications, just as we see here. Then we can do our calculations. This does not come out of the box with ArcGIS, but we can definitely build this in Visual Basic for Applications. Another reason why we might want to use VBA or Visual Basic for Applications is to make shortcuts for repetitive tasks, such as the table that we see in this slide, where we have one field called the date edited. When we edit certain features in ArcMap, we don't automatically get this field populated. We'll have to manually go and do it ourselves. What we can do is we can write a series of code statements and say anytime we edit a feature or we create a brand new feature, automatically populate this field to the current date, reading it from our operating system. And this is just an example of making a shortcut for repetitive tasks. Automatically do it so we don't have to do it manually. So now we know a couple of reasons why we use VBA, but what exactly is it? Well, it's a programming language. All programming languages is just a set of instructions for computers to follow. Just like humans communicate through a written language, computers need to know how to communicate with one another and communicate with the data on the disk. There are many different languages that can be used with ArcGIS. Today we will be discussing Visual Basic for Applications. VBA, or Visual Basic for Applications, is very nice for a couple reasons. One is that it's automatically embedded in the applications that use them. So when we get ArcMap, VBA automatically comes with it. We don't have to go out and buy the separate software to write our programming code. Another reason is that VBA is used commonly to many different applications. It's used in Microsoft Word, Microsoft PowerPoint. There are many different applications like this that can use VBA. So once you learn the general syntax, or you learn the general language structure for one VBA application, then it's going to apply across the board, and we can use it in all of our different applications. I'd like to now discuss just a couple other programming languages that you may hear associated with ArcGIS. One is going to be VBScript. This is a scripting language, very similar to Visual Basic or Visual Basic for Applications, but not near as extensive. Another is going to be standalone Visual Basic. It's going to be used to create standalone executables or components that plug into an existing application, such as ArcMap. So this is not automatically embedded in ArcMap. It's a standalone program, and you have to tell it how it's going to tie it into ArcMap. There's much more you can do with standalone Visual Basic, and you can hide the code from people. And there's also many other COM-compliant languages, such as C++ and Delphi, that can also plug into ArcMap. This is very similar to standalone VB or Visual Basic. It's just a different set of rules. It's just a different language, so it has these different rules to follow by. Again, today we're just going to be talking about Visual Basic for applications. Again, a little bit more about Visual Basic for applications. It is a built-in customization environment of ArcGIS. It's not something that we have to go out and buy. We get it automatically when we get ArcGIS. It's available in both ArcMap and ArcCatalog, so you can customize both ArcMap and ArcCatalog through Visual Basic for applications. It can be used for running macros, creating custom user forms, as we saw a few slides ago, and for working with our UI controls. Our UI controls, for those of you who missed the first web workshop customizing ArcMap, this stands for User Interface Controls. We can make our brand new controls, or if you will, buttons that we can add to the interface, and attach some code to them. VBA has an integrated debugging environment for error checking our code. So when we're writing all of our code statements, we're probably going to be coming up with some errors because no one is perfect. Well, what's nice about VBA is you get this automatic integrated debugging environment, so you can stop and see where are the errors that I'm making while I'm writing my code. So how do we get to Visual Basic for applications? Well, we can go to the Tools menu, drop down to Macros, and go to Visual Basic Editor, or choose the shortcut key Alt F11. When we do that, we're going to see the Visual Basic Editor appear, and this is what it's going to look like. I'm just going to point out a few key features in the Visual Basic Editor right now. To the left, we see the Project Explorer. The Project Explorer is just going to hold many different projects. Now, what a project is pretty much a customization environment. You're telling it where are you going to store the code. Are you going to store it globally? So every time you open up ArcMap, do you want to access that code? Or do you want to store it just within a particular project? That way you can only access that code when you open up that project, not other instances of ArcMap. Within your projects, you're going to see different code modules. Now, a code module is just going to be an empty window for housing your code. That's where we're going to be writing our code. And within each code module, we're going to have different procedures. A procedure is just going to be a block of code that's going to perform some type of action for us. Now, each one of these features we're going to be going over in depth in the next few slides. So don't get too scared right yet. We're going to be going over each one of these, and we're not going to be writing code at this point. We're just going to get you familiar with this environment. Again, just kind of a recap here. We kind of have this hierarchy when working with this code storage in VBA. First, we have our Project Explorer, and that's what we see in the left of the slide. It just organizes our different projects, our levels of customization. So within our Project Explorer, we're going to have a project. A project is just going to be a folder that stores our modules. It's going to be our customization environment. It's going to be either a Normal.mxt or a particular MXD that we're going to work with. Within each project, we're going to have modules. A module is again just going to be an empty window that will store our code. Within our module, we will have many different procedures. Sometimes we may only have one. A procedure is just a block of code that's going to perform some type of action. A procedure is commonly referred to as a macro. Within a procedure, we're going to have statements. A statement is just referred to as one single line of code. So let's review this environment. VBA, or Visual Basic for Applications, is a built-in customization environment that comes with ArcGIS. So we don't have to go out and buy it. We automatically get it with both ArcMap and ArcCatalog. We learned that there are many different programming languages that can be used to expand ArcGIS. But again, today we're only going to talk about Visual Basic for Applications. We briefly saw that there's a hierarchy of projects, code modules, procedures, and functions and statements that are held within the VBA editor. And again, we're going to be going over each one of these topics in a little bit more detail in the upcoming slides. And ultimately, it's up to you to decide where your customization will be saved. Are you going to save it to the Normal.mxt, save it globally, or to a current template or map document? And we'll look at that a little bit further. So again, when we're looking in the Project Explorer, we're going to see different projects. So in this case, in this slide, we see 3 different projects. And within the VBA environment for ArcMap, we will only have up to 3 and never more than 3 different projects where we can store our code. When we store it in the normal template, or the Normal.mxt, this means we are storing it globally. Every time we open up ArcMap, if we place our code here, we will see this code available to us. We always have the option of storing it within a map document, the MXD, as we see project sandiego.mxd below. When we save our code here, we're only going to see that code available to us when we open up that particular map document. If we open up another brand new instance of ArcMap, we will not have that code available to us. And third, sometimes we will have the ArcMap template or MXT file. So we can save our code to any base template. We will not always have this option available to us, only if we are working with a template. What happens in this case, if we save our code to a template, any map document that is based off that template will then also have that code. Things are a little bit different when we are working with ArcCatalog. ArcCatalog only has the normal template because we don't have the concept of working with new documents when we open up ArcCatalog. We're always working within the same environment. So when we save our code to ArcCatalog, it's always going to be there unless we manually get rid of it. So now we know the different types of projects or our customization environments that we will see within our Project Explorer. We know that each project are going to store different modules. In this seminar, we will just be discussing the This Document Code module. It's just a standard code module that is going to be an empty window for you to place code. It will automatically be supplied within each project. So you're going to see it within the Normal.mxt, your current project, and if you're working with the MXT. We can also use other modules. So we can insert new standard modules if we like. But the This Document Code module is nice because it automatically comes for us. So we can automatically paste our code in there. Once we have a code module, then we're going to be pasting our code or writing our code within that module. One way that we might be working with a code is through a procedure. A procedure is just a block of code in a module that will perform some type of action. A procedure is oftentimes referred to as a macro or a sub-procedure. What we see below is public sub send message followed by end sub. This is the wrapper lines for one procedure. Below that, we see public sub, add layer, end sub. That is wrapper lines for another sub-procedure. So in this case, we have two different procedures. The procedures do not have any code within them yet, so they are not going to actually perform an action for us yet. We will have to put lines of code within these wrapper lines, but we are just laying down the framework at this point. The very first thing that we see is the keyword public. This is just defining the scope of the procedure, and we will discuss scope in a future web workshop. Next, we see the keyword sub. Sub is just defining that we are going to define a procedure. And then we have the name of the procedure. We can give it any name that we want except for certain reserved Visual Basic keywords. So you're usually going to name it something based upon the action that it's going to perform. Some procedures will require parameters. So it will require certain input before you can actually run that data or run that action. As we see here, we can have many different procedures within one module, or we may just have one. We can also work with a function within a module. A function is very similar to a procedure, but it will return a value. So what we see in this slide is we see public function, calculate tax, we have total as double, which is our parameter list, and then it's return type. The return type is just specifying what type of data are we returning. Double is a certain type of data that we can return, a certain type of numeric data. This is followed up by end function. Just like working with our procedures, this is just the wrapper lines, or our backbone for our code. We're actually going to write the executing code within these two wrapper lines. Again, the scope, public, we will be defining that in a future web workshop. We'll see that we are defining the Visual Basic keyword function rather than sub because we want to actually return something. Again, we will want to give it a name and then a parameter list. Sometimes you may have to be taking in some data before you can return something. So what this function is doing, it's taking in some value. Total is the value that it's taking in. Let's say a total amount of money, for instance, $100. And then we'll actually write the executing code within these two wrapper lines that will perform the total tax plus the total price that you paid. So then what will be returned is, based upon a 6% tax rate, $106. That is going to be what will be returned from this function. Again, we don't have those lines executing that code, but that's what we might see a function possibly do for us. Again, we can add many different procedures and functions within one code module. So within our procedures or functions, we're going to see statements. A statement is just simply a line of code that carries out an action. We don't have to pay too much attention yet to what each statement is doing. What we see here is we have two different statements. One statement is popping up an input box, which we see below. The next statement is popping up a message box, telling the user hello. Again, we don't have to pay attention to breaking apart each one of these statements and see how they're working. All we need to know right now is that a statement is one line of code that carries out an action. And once we have all our different statements in place within our function or procedure, they are going to be run in order. So all the different statements will be carried out in the order that they are placed. So now we are very familiar with working with the VBA environment. How do we get help as to further navigation in the Visual Basic for Applications environment? Within Visual Basic for Applications, we can go to the help. A shortcut is choosing the F1 key, and we'll get the Visual Basic help. This will give us some basic help as some of the predefined Visual Basic functions and beginning in writing our code. Again, we'll discuss writing our code within the web workshop on August 29th, 2002. For people who are a little bit more advanced and they want to start working with ArcObjects, we have a 2-volume book set called Exploring ArcObjects. Again, this is more advanced material, and you should be rather more familiar with working with VBA. We also have a book called Getting to Know ArcObjects coming out in early next year, Q1 2003. We can go to arcobjectsonline.esri.com and the ArcObjects Developer Help. These are both places for developers, but if you saw the first web workshop entitled Customizing ArcMap, Easy Ways to Extend the Interface, we'll see that there's many developer samples out there for us. So we don't have to be a developer yet to use these two places, ArcObjects Online and the Developers Help. We can take other developer samples and paste them within the VBA Editor and then run them from there. We can also go to support.esri.com. There's much help out there for us too into how to come up with good coding practices. So let's go over a quick topic review. We know that the customizations can be saved in 3 places. The Normal.mxt, this is going to be saving it globally, within a template, or within a map document. Each one of these projects or levels of customization is going to have a this document code module. It's a standard code module that comes with the ArcGIS VBA Editor. Again, we can also make our brand new code modules and place our code within those new code modules as well. But the this document is always there for us. We learned that procedures and functions are just blocks of code that will perform some type of action. Within our procedures and function, we are going to have statements. A statement is just simply going to be one line of code that is going to be used as a building block for procedures and functions. And there are many resources for help. So now we'd like to go into a quick demonstration. Let's go into the Visual Basic Editor and take a look at some of the terminology we introduced. We'll look at the Project Explorer, the various projects, modules, the This Document code module. I'll point all these out in the demonstration as we go along. We'll also look at a way how we can make a shortcut to the VBA Editor.
Now let's go into the Visual Basic Editor and take a look at some of the terminology we introduced. Rather than immediately go into the Visual Basic for Applications Editor, let's run a macro or procedure from the interface and then go backwards and find out exactly how it is running. For those of you who took the web workshop, Customizing ArcMap, Easy Ways to Extend the Interface, you learn that you can run a macro as a sub-procedure. So we'll go to the Tools menu, drop down to Macros, and Macros again. We will get a listing of all available macros. Again, these are also known as procedures. Notice at the bottom of the dialog box, it's asking us where do we want to take these macros from. Do we want to take them from the current project or from the global environment, the Normal.mxt template? We're going to stick with the current project. Let's just go ahead and pick out one of these macros or sub-procedures and run it. In this case, let's run the calculate tax.purchase sub-procedure. Just click run. Notice that a dialog box pops up, and I will type some information in that. Another dialog box will tell me the tax included with that total price that I entered. So now let's go look at how this macro is actually being run through Visual Basic for Applications. Again, we can get to the Visual Basic for Applications interface by going to Tools, Macros, and choosing Visual Basic Editor. This will open the Visual Basic for Applications Editor interface. Notice to the upper left-hand corner we have our Project Explorer. This lists all the different projects that we have available to us. Right now we have 2 projects that are available. We have the normal project and the current project or current MXD that we are working with. These are the same as the listings in the macros dialog box that we saw earlier. We can expand each one of these. Notice that within each one there is an ArcMap objects folder. We can expand this and we'll find that within that we see a this document code module. We can open up the this document code module by simply right-clicking on it and choosing View Code. We can also double-click it to open it up. Again, a code module is just an empty window for us to write code in. There is no code in the normal template at this point, so we'll just close it down. We can also look at the this document code module for our current project. This time I'll just double-click on it to open it up. Notice that there is already some code in here provided. We actually saw this as a macro in the macros dialog box earlier. Let me close this down. Let's go take a look at the calculate task procedure that I ran earlier. In this case, it's going to be under the modules folder. This document is a standard module, but it's a special kind of module. It will come along with any project that you're working with. In this case, I'm working with a module that I added. So I can open up the calculate tax module and notice that I have 1 public subprocedure and 1 public function. Again, a procedure and a function are both chunks of code that can perform some type of action for us. The only difference between a public subprocedure and a public function is that a function will return a value to us. In this case, the function is returning the value plus the tax, whereas the public sub purchase is just telling us what is the information including that tax. Notice that within each one we have statements. A statement is just a line of code that performs some type of action. In the public sub purchase we have 5 different statements. Some of these statements you'll actually see perform an execution, such as open up an input box that you'll enter in the price before tax. Some of them perform operations behind the scenes that you won't actually see occur. Our function just has 1 statement. These work together. Let's go back to the ArcMap application and run this procedure again. Again, I'm going to go to the Tools menu, Macros, and Macros again. Notice I've been working with the calculate tax.purchase macro. Let's pay attention to this name right here. It says calculate tax.purchase. If we go back to the Visual Basic Editor and look at this in more detail, calculate tax is the name of the module that we see in the Project Explorer. We can also see the name of the module on the title bar itself. And we were running calculate tax.purchase. Purchase is just simply the name of the sub-procedure that we've been running. So by running that macro, it told us first to go look in a particular module, in this case calculate tax, and then go find a particular public sub-procedure within that module. Again, just to recap, we have our Project Explorer, which will contain our various projects. We have two different projects in this case. We are working with the current MXD as our project. And within our project, we will have a series of modules. We can work with the This Document module directly, or we can add our own standard modules. And you will actually see that in the exercise that accompanies the web workshop. Within a module, you will have public subprocedures and public functions. Within both your functions and procedures, you're going to have statements. Statement is just one single line of code. Now we'd like to switch gears a little bit on you and show you a little bit of a review from the Customizing ArcMap web workshop as to how you can add a button to the user interface to make a shortcut to the Visual Basic Editor. Again, we can obtain the Visual Basic Editor by going to Tools, Macros, and Visual Basic Editor. But if we go to the Customize dialog box, we can go to the Commands tab, scroll down and find the Tools category, and at the very bottom of the Commands listing, we're going to see the Visual Basic Editor. I can just drag and drop this to any portion of my interface and let go, close the Customize dialog box, and just simply click on this button, and that will display my Visual Basic Editor, rather than having to find it on the menu. Okay, I'd like to thank you for joining me today in this web workshop. I hope to see you in the live web workshop on August 29th entitled Introduction to Programming Using VBA, Using Variables. In that seminar, we will be digging into the VBA editor much more and writing your very first code. Until then, take care and best wishes.